Welcome back this evening. The world feels quieter now, doesn't it? That soft hour when everything slows just enough for you to notice the space between things. The day has already drifted off somewhere, leaving behind only the low hum of the night. Take a moment to breathe. Let your shoulders drop. Let the rhythm of your breath stretch out and settle. The pace of the world will wait for you. It always does. Tonight's story is called The Field Where the Wind Stood Still. It's about a vast open plain, a place where even the air seems to hold its breath. The grass moves, but the wind does not. Sound fades before it reaches your ears. And somewhere in the middle of all that stillness, something forgotten continues to wait. So settle in and let the quiet stretch around you. There's nothing to fix, nothing to chase, just a moment suspended between motion and rest. Let's step into it together. I reached the edge of the field just as the sun slipped behind a low bank of clouds. The light that remained stretched across the plain like a thin veil, pale gold turning slowly to gray. I could see for miles, nothing but grass, dry and waving, but not moving in any real direction. It swayed without wind, 1,000 small gestures in perfect silence. Even my footsteps seemed hesitant, as though sound itself wasn't sure it belonged here. I paused and waited for the wind to catch up, but it never came. The air felt neither warm nor cold, just there, steady and weightless. I took another step and watched a ripple move through the grass ahead of me, smooth and effortless, but without any breeze to carry it. It was as if the land had learned to breathe on its own. The further I walked, the quieter it became. Birds that had circled overhead earlier were gone now, and the usual hum of insects had faded completely. It wasn't emptiness I felt, though. It was presence, dense and watchful, like the hush inside a cathedral before a prayer. The world had gone still, but not asleep. The grass brushed against my legs as I moved, whispering in a language I couldn't quite catch. Every blade seemed alive, each one moving to a rhythm that didn't belong to the air. They leaned and bent and straightened again, but the sound they made was soft, more vibration than noise. I couldn't tell if I was hearing it or feeling it. Somewhere in the distance, the light caught on something metallic. It was faint, like the last glimmer of water on stone. I turned toward it, curious, though I couldn't say why. It didn't feel like a place meant to be reached. But I started walking anyway, the silence parting around me like tall grass in a dream. After a few minutes, or maybe longer, time didn't seem to keep its shape here, I realized the horizon hadn't changed. Every direction looked the same, and even my own footprints vanished behind me. There was no path, no wind, no sign that anything had ever crossed this space before. And yet, I had the strange sense that I was being gently guided forward. The silence deepened as I walked. It wasn't empty, though. It had a texture to it, like fabric stretched over something unseen. Each step made a faint sound, but the echo fell short, swallowed before it could travel. It was as if the field decided which sounds were allowed to exist and which would simply dissolve. The air pressed lightly against my skin, unmoving but thick with attention. The grass around me shimmered faintly in the low light, not from wind or movement. It seemed to shift color on its own, from pale gold to deep green and back again. I couldn't tell if it was a trick of the eyes or the field breathing slowly. Even my own heartbeat seemed slower here, sinking to something vast and patient. I wondered how long this place had been waiting like this, between one breath and the next. Ahead, the glint I'd seen earlier flashed again. I followed it until I found a shape rising from the grass, a tall metal structure, bent and skeletal, like the remains of a windmill stripped bare by time. Its blades were frozen in place, pointing toward nowhere in particular. A single rusted chain dangled from the frame, unmoving despite the open air around it. Not even the smallest tremor passed through. I touched the base of the structure, expecting it to be cold, but it was warm, almost pulsing. The metal hummed faintly beneath my hand, too soft to be sound, too steady to be vibration. It was alive in some quiet mechanical way, a remnant of something that had once known motion and refused to forget it. It felt like the heart of the stillness. I leaned against one of the beams and looked out across the field again. The horizon wavered slightly, not from heat, but from something subtler, like a thin curtain of air folding over itself. It gave the illusion of movement, though the field itself remained perfectly still. It was like watching the world breathe from the inside out. For a moment, I thought I saw someone standing in the distance. A dark shape, unmoving, facing in my direction. But when I blinked, the figure dissolved into the grass, or perhaps the grass had decided to become it. Either way, it left me with the quiet sense that I wasn't alone, not entirely. I stayed by the frozen windmill for a while, unsure whether to keep going. The air around it hummed faintly, not with sound, but with pressure, as if it was holding back a storm that would never come. When I stepped away, the hum faded, replaced by a silence even heavier than before. It was then I realized that my footsteps no longer made any sound at all. I could see the grass bend beneath each step, but I heard nothing. The sensation was disorienting, like walking inside a thought I wasn't supposed to disturb. Every time I moved, the field seemed to hesitate, as if deciding whether to let me continue. Then it would release me, slow and gentle, like a gate opening. I kept walking toward what felt like the center, though it was hard to tell where that might be. Everything here seemed endless, looping quietly over itself. After what might have been minutes or hours, the ground began to change. The tall grass thinned into a smooth plain, flat and featureless. The earth beneath my feet was firm but soft, like packed dust. It held faint patterns that shimmered when I moved, small spirals and arcs that disappeared when I tried to look directly at them. They felt familiar, like something drawn by wind long ago. At the very center of the plain stood a single post of dark wood. It was simple, unmarked, no taller than my shoulder. A small strip of fabric hung from it, pale, weightless, yet completely still. I waited for it to move, but it didn't. The air around it felt charged, alive, like the pause before lightning. I reached out and touched the fabric. It was softer than it looked, cool to the touch like water that had been waiting in the shade. And when my fingers brushed it, a faint sound rose, a single low note, long and hollow, coming from everywhere at once. It wasn't loud, but it filled the world. For the first time, the air moved. A gentle current brushed across my face, then stopped. The sound faded just as quietly as it had come, leaving the fabric perfectly still again. It felt like the wind had tried to return but forgot how. I stepped back, letting the silence fold over me once more. The world had exhaled, just once, and now it was waiting to see what I would do next. I sat beside the post for a long while, listening to the quiet hum that seemed to come from within the field itself. It wasn't sound exactly, more like the vibration that lingers after a deep note fades. The grass at the edges of my vision seemed to shimmer in small waves, swaying not from air but from memory. I realized then that the field wasn't resisting the wind. It was remembering it. A place this still had to have known motion once. Every blade of grass seemed shaped by it, curved and bent as if sculpted by the echo of long-gone gusts. Maybe the wind had passed through here once and simply stopped. Maybe it had grown tired and decided to rest. Or maybe it had left a part of itself behind. I looked up and saw clouds forming far above, thin and pale like streaks of smoke. They didn't move either. They hung in place, painted against the sky, their edges sharp and eternal. It was beautiful in a strange, impossible way, like the world had been paused mid-sentence. I wondered who had the power to hold time this gently. The post beside me began to hum again. I could feel it through the ground, faint vibrations traveling outward in slow circles. The grass responded, small ripples of movement spreading through it like light across water. They reached the horizon and faded, then returned, slower each time. It felt like the land was practicing the idea of wind, trying to remember how it felt to move. I stood and closed my eyes. The air around me was warm now, not from the sun, but from the hum that rose from below. When I lifted my hand, I thought I felt it, a faint push against my skin, as light as a sigh. It passed, then returned, uneven and searching. It wasn't wind yet, but it was close. I opened my eyes and saw the fabric on the post move for the first time. Just once, a tiny motion, the smallest flutter, gone before I could be sure it had happened at all. But the air carried it, a single thread of motion unraveling through the stillness. And in that brief moment, the field breathed. Not enough to change anything, just enough to remember that it could. As I walked farther into the open plain, I could feel the faint stirring begin to build. The air was no longer perfectly still. It trembled, hesitant but alive, like the pulse of something waking from a long sleep. Each step forward seemed to coax more movement, as though the field was testing the limits of its own memory. The grasses swayed in small, uncertain arcs, unsure whether to follow or resist. It was the gentlest rebellion I'd ever seen. I reached another rise where the earth tilted upward just slightly. From there, I could see the full expanse of the land, endless and pale, dotted with faint metallic structures like the one I'd touched earlier. Dozens of them, half buried, their edges catching the dull light. They were arranged in a wide spiral, the same shape as the markings I'd seen on the ground before. It looked less like machinery and more like an offering. The hum was stronger now, weaving in and out of itself, forming slow, resonant tones. It wasn't random. It had rhythm, direction. If I stood still, I could almost hear the pattern within it, like an unfinished melody the land was trying to recall. It rose, faded, and rose again, circling me in gentle waves. I felt small inside it, but also part of it, like a note caught in the middle of a song. The sky darkened to a deep, even gray. Not from clouds, more like the light itself was dimming to match the quiet below. It wasn't frightening. It felt necessary, like dusk arriving exactly when it was meant to. The hum deepened again, and for a moment, it felt like the ground beneath me took a breath. Then, without warning, the wind returned. It didn't rush or roar. It rolled in slowly, sweeping over the grass in a perfect unified motion. Everything moved together, the grass, the metal frames, even the air itself, as though the entire field had become a single living thing. It wasn't loud, but it carried weight, like the sigh of the world remembering itself. When it passed, I realized I was smiling. The field settled once more, the grass falling still, though not completely. A faint ripple lingered, soft and endless. The hum had faded, but the air was different now, lighter, open, breathing again. The silence that followed didn't feel empty anymore. I stayed there long after the movement had faded, standing in the pale light that followed. The horizon seemed closer now, the edges of the field softened by thin threads of drifting air. It wasn't the same stillness I'd first found. It was quieter in a different way, like the calm that follows a long exhale. Something had shifted, though I couldn't say what. Maybe the field had released something it had been holding too tightly for too long. I began walking back the way I came. The wind followed, faint and intermittent, brushing against my shoulders and slipping through the grass beside me. It moved as though learning again, testing its rhythm, circling in small, playful bursts. Now and then it carried with it a whisper, not words, but soft tonal echoes that reminded me of the hum beneath the earth. The kind of sound that doesn't ask to be understood. As I neared the edge of the field, the post came into view once more. The fabric tied to it fluttered lightly in the air, catching the dim glow of the sky. I stood beside it and watched as the faint motion continued, steady and effortless. It was no longer trying. It simply was. That seemed like a lesson worth keeping. I looked up one last time. The clouds had begun to drift, slow but certain, crossing the wide sky in silent procession. They left thin streaks of color behind, soft blues, pale golds, and muted pinks that bled together like watercolor left to dry. The light caught the field just right, and for an instant, everything shimmered. Then it passed, as all moments do. When I finally turned away, the wind moved with me. Not strong, not cold, just present. It trailed behind for a few steps, then drifted off, chasing itself into the open distance. The air felt whole again, as though the field had taken one long, deep breath and decided to keep breathing. And I walked on, quietly grateful to have heard it happen. So here's where the story ends. Somewhere out there, the wind is moving again, slow, steady, remembering the shape of its own song. And maybe, when the world grows still around you, you'll think of this field, waiting patiently for breath to return. Not everything that pauses is lost. Sometimes it's just resting, gathering itself before it drifts again. As you lie there now, let your own stillness find its rhythm. Let your breath settle into the quiet, matching the slow pulse of the night. You've traveled far enough for one evening. There's nothing left to do but rest. The world will keep turning. softly, steadily, as you drift deeper into sleep. Good night, and thank you for listening.